Okay, so we'd now like to begin with our third speaker, Dr. Katie Woolaston from QUT. The theme for Katie's presentation is Australia's best practice examples of transdisciplinary or multidisciplinary research tackling global challenges. And her presentation title is An Argument for Pandemic Risk Management Using a Multidisciplinary One Health Approach to Governance, an Australian Case Study. So I've just given you I've taken you off the hook for reading that title. Over to you, please, Katie.
Thank you. Thanks for doing that, because it is very long. So, it does eat into my time introducing my topic. But
Good.
Hi everybody, I'm Katie. I want to talk to you or give a little bit of an example of how to go about transdisciplinary research, especially when there's a lot of different or multi-disciplines and people don't usually speak the same language or the same disciplinary language, and it can be really difficult from an Australian perspective, and particularly with respect to pandemics and pandemic risk management. So I'm going to start by giving you an idea of how many people I worked with on this project and how interdisciplinary it was. I had a bunch of co-authors that helped with a policy brief to government, and also a published paper that was published in the journal called Globalization and Health. I had a bunch of people also come to some workshops, which I'm going to describe to you the process of that in a minute. Oh, too quick. And I had funding for a number of places, including the federal government. But I also wanted to start by introducing to you some of the concepts that I'm going to be talking about, because some of you may not be aware of some of the concepts. They might not be known to you. So my talk on the project is about what we call One Health and deep prevention of pandemics. So emerging infectious diseases. These are the diseases that are emerging in people and have the potential to become pandemics, increasing in frequency. I know that's not what you want to hear when we're kind of winding down or feel like we're winding down from COVID-19, but unfortunately they are increasing in frequency. And most emerging infectious diseases and all pandemics of the last century have been caused by diseases spilling over from non-human animals to humans. And we know that the increase in emerging infectious diseases is actually linked to anthropogenic environmental changes, in particular biodiversity loss, climate change, agricultural intensification, land use change, and other forms of anthropogenic changes. So when I say that this talk is about deep prevention of pandemics, what I'm looking at is preventing those environmental anthropogenic changes, or looking at pandemic prevention through an environmental conservation lens. So most pandemic law and policy responses around the world remain tightly focused on monitoring reportable zoonotic disease. So zoonotic disease is what we call the disease that originates in the animal and in wildlife and other animals, and detecting those events where the disease spills over from animals to people in production animals and humans, and preventing ongoing transmission between people. So this is what we saw after COVID-19 was the public health management, right? So preventing the spread between people by lockdowns and border closures and developing vaccines and those kinds of things. So mostly when we're looking at these three stages on this screen, most of the research, most of the money goes into stage 3, a little bit goes into stage 2. And although these are valuable measures, worthy of further attention, of course they are also passive and reactive and do not take action against the underlying drivers of emerging disease that pose a dynamic risk. But what we know is the cost of actually preventing pandemics is 100 times less than the cost of response. And it's actually probably, the difference is probably more than that now, because those figures were come up with during the start of the COVID pandemic, which has completely blown what all the economists thought in terms of how much response there was going to cost. So how do we, in a multidisciplinary way, link those three stages of pandemic management: the environmental aspect, the animal aspect, and the human health aspect? Well, one approach that has been really prominent since COVID-19, but was developed before COVID-19, but of course, after this pandemic, it's become much more prominent, is what we call the One Health approach. One Health is an integrated, unifying approach that aims to sustainably balance and optimize the health of people, animals, and ecosystems. And it recognizes that the health of humans, animals, and the wider environment are closely linked and interdependent. So it's not just about making sure we think about human health in our policies, it's making sure we think about human health, environmental health, and animal health as really interconnected in all policies. The approach, though, is quite unique in its way that it engages different disciplines and multiple sectors. Like, that's really what it's about, is bringing, you can't prevent pandemics, and you can't look at the interconnections between environment, health, animal health, and human health without bringing disciplines together. And so the approach really is about mobilizing multiple sectors and disciplines at varying levels of society to work together to foster well-being, tackle threats to health and ecosystems, and addressing many other aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals. So what does all of that have to do with my project? So, as it says on this slide, the One Health framework presents us with an opportunity to not only help with preventing pandemics, but to fundamentally shift the way humanity views and governs its relationships with the planet. However, there are a number of issues with the One Health framework, as there are with any framework. No framework is perfect. What we found is that public health really remains centralized. So what we think should happen is that One Health is a framework and under which public health sits. One Health is the overarching framework, and public health is a factor in One Health. But a lot of people at the ground see public health as being the overall important outcome of a One Health approach. And One Health sits as a way of achieving public health. There is a missing governance link in One Health, which means that we have a really good kind of theoretical framework that's been developed by all these international experts at a high level. And we also have a bunch of people doing really fantastic One Health work on the ground. But what we don't have is really good laws and policies that help us embed One Health into decision-making every day. And One Health scholarship also, as with most scholarship, requires decolonisation. So we took these things that were missing from the literature, and to address kind of the multiple governance areas that come into those and that are related to pandemic risk management generally, we formed a multidisciplinary research group, or a multidisciplinary practice group, to analyse, synthesise and harmonise the links between pandemic risk management approaches and issues in different disciplines, to provide a holistic overview of current practice in Australia, and then secondly, to examine the need for reform in Australian legislation and policy. And I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail, because the theme is how to, the theme of this conference is how to do these things rather than the outcomes that I had from my particular project. So what we did is, fortunately for me, I have a lot of great contacts in government and in NGOs and in academia in the One Health space. And so we got together there was about 36 people from multiple disciplines, and from government, from Wildlife Health Australia and other NGOs, and from different disciplines in academia, including kind of food security and law, economics, social sciences, lots of epidemiologists, plant health experts, you name it. Essentially, we found it. And we also, of course, very importantly for an Australian context, if you're looking at a holistic perspective, we also, of course, had a number of First Nations participants in our workshop to help really give that local context. And what we did is we paid someone who was fantastic, a consultant, his name was Craig Salt from Sustainable Consulting, to lead a series of workshops over 6 weeks. And he was fantastic because it meant that I could just engage in the workshops and contribute ideas and help pull together ideas rather than having to worry about what was happening. And he did all of that for us. And we had about 6 workshops where over a period of time, we started to talk together about what the issues were in Australian One Health context from our different disciplines. And from each disciplinary perspective, we started coming up with common themes around where the issues were that kind of seemed to go across all of the different areas. So we had an online series of workshops. And from those workshops, we came up with what we call the blueprint for moving One Health forward in Australia. Now, I don't expect you to be able to read this slide. There's a lot of information on here, and it's in my report on my QUT webpage if you wanted to have a look at it. But I'm showing you this because I wanted to show kind of how we went through the consultancy process with our really big group of multidisciplinary stakeholders who don't often talk to each other, don't talk across disciplinary boundaries. And so what we did is we started with just having a chat about, from our own perspectives, what is happening in the One Health space in Australia currently? What are the good things that Australia does? What is it doing really well in the One Health space? And then what are the not so good things? Like, where do we not have enough information? Where do we need more research? Or what are we just generally doing poorly? And from there, we came up with some ideas about where we thought the One Health system or Australia's One Health framework should be. Where do we want it to be? Again, pulling together all of the different things from our own disciplines. And we came up with a set of guiding principles around how we wanted to move forward with a One Health framework. Included some values and a mission and a vision to help government focus on One Health frameworks moving forward. We then thought about, how do we get there? So how do we get to where we want to be? What's a potential strategy going to look like? And finally, how we make that happen. And Craig was really wonderful because he put together this blueprint for us, from which I, with a couple of RAs, drafted a policy brief that went across various departments in the federal government, and also the research journal article that I mentioned earlier. Now, I'm very quickly going to talk to you about what the findings were, although it's probably not as interesting for you as the actual methodology itself. But we had so many findings because we just had so much expertise and different disciplinary points of view in the workshops, and we had different people drop in and out at different times, so lots of different information coming in. Some of the things that we found were recurrent risks in the One Health system is that we don't know what the unknown unknowns are, and we don't really have a system or a research framework to find them out in terms of biosecurity risks. So unknown biosecurity risks have received limited attention, and there are few policies to actively kind of seek out those risks and identify and assess future potential biosecurity risks from domestic or international sources. We also know that we have big risks coming from international animal trade, migratory animals, and globalization. For example, Northern Australia is deemed to be at an increased infectious disease risk due to Southeast Asia's proximity and higher rates of trade and tourism between them. We have animal agricultural production systems in Australia that specialise in large-scale production, where lots and lots of animals are held together in close confines for over extended periods of time, and that increases the risk of disease migration and disease spillover to people. We also have other unknown risks or understudied risks, including the changes to Australia's ecosystems through land clearing, mismanagement of waterways, bushfires, climate change, and biodiversity decline. So when we were thinking about, we go back to that blueprint, when we were thinking about what we want to be and how to get there, we came up with a series of steps or a series of things that we needed to concentrate on, or we were recommending to the government that they concentrate on when looking at a more holistic, multidisciplinary One Health framework. So the first thing was a coordinated and well-supported One Health system. Now, since we've written this paper into that 2021, lots of things have actually happened in the One Health space in Australia. We're getting a new Centre for Disease Control. It's currently being discussed and negotiated at the federal government level in the Department of Health. That's going to have a One Health focus, which is wonderful because that was one of our recommendations that we made in our report. We also have lots of different government departments that are really engaged with One Health and trying to talk to other government departments or across departments, which is also really wonderful. But we know that preventing pandemics by managing environmental drivers such as climate change and land use change and all of the other things I mentioned requires stakeholder engagement across all sectors and all scales in all communities, not just across government departments. Australia's One Health approach we recommended should be both coordinated across governance scales and disciplinary silos and collaborative with diverse stakeholders. So this includes coordination with policy spheres such as biosecurity, trade, agriculture, private land management, environment and wildlife management, as well as public health, of course, and stakeholder engagement with Indigenous groups, farmers, rangers, ecologists, and community members, among many others. So we recommended, as I mentioned, we recommended a new One Health body, a One Health governance body that sits across federal government departments. Unfortunately, the CDC is currently being housed in the Department of Health, but we'll see how that goes. We also recommended that Australia take a healthy country, healthy people policy approach congruent with First Nations laws. So in Australia, a shared responsibility approach to One Health governance really should be focused on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander-led One Health policies. And in order for that to happen, there's lots of social justice issues that need to be sorted out, such as self-determining structures, upskilling, and how to effectively partner with Indigenous groups. But this includes things like local voices to creating policies and laws, and really strong partnerships rather than just using Indigenous knowledge or consulting with Indigenous knowledge and taking that away and doing something else with it. The third thing on this slide is the lack of coordination and prioritisation of Australia's One Health efforts has led to massive gaps in understanding of national risks and drivers regarding spillover from animals to people and pandemics. So we need research support from government and other places in a really long list of things, but things that include genome mapping, data and technology, geography, policy, and justice and equity are really particularly needed, how to include those in our One Health policies. Finally, we need a series of networked policies and laws. So just as I mentioned that no one government department can take care of this or no one group, no single instrument or institution or law can prevent the coming pandemics. So we recommended integration and enhancement of existing environmental laws, outlining a series of One Health, healthy country, healthy people targets for Australia, similar to the SDGs, and adopting national standards for those goals. And that is it from me, and happy to take questions on the method or the outcomes.
Well, thank you so much, Katie. I just want to begin by saying it's such a relevant topic. I love that you've, really considered the voices from First Nations people in your research, and your Preventing Pandemics blue sheet is really comprehensive. So congratulations. We won't actually have time for questions. I'm sorry. We're going to have to go to the next person.
Oh,
if
my
anyone
apologies.
would, no problem. If anyone would like to put a question into the chat or send them to us, we will make sure that you get them. But I really think that your presentation shows transdisciplinary research in action in the real world. So really, congratulations to you.